welcome to today's Before Purpose webinar. My name is Payal Jain, and over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to show you some examples of how waste disposal impacts your business and how your business's waste impacts the world around you. We'll look at the environmental, social, and financial impacts of waste disposal, examine potential solutions that are already being used by real businesses, demonstrate quantifiable impacts, show how these solutions can be scaled for small and medium-sized businesses, list both the potential benefits and challenges in each proposal, and finally discuss some of the next steps you can take. If you own, manage, operate, or even work for a small and medium-sized businesses, I hope you'll stay with me for the next 30 minutes. Be sure to stay tuned until the end, where we will provide some downloadable content and some important contact information. Every business generates waste. Waste is any byproduct of a business activities that it cannot use. Examples of waste can include anything from waste heat to chemical byproducts to worn out building materials to even just uneaten food. Today we will focus on material waste. When a business generates material waste, it's usually first temporarily stored, then hauled away, and then disposed of. But where does it end up? Typically, anything that business throws out will wind up in one of the six places: a recycling center, where reusable materials can be reclaimed; a landfill, where it decomposes over time; an incineration facility, where it is burned; a composting or anaerobic digestion facility, where organic waste like yard and food waste are broken down to generate methane and soil that can be reused; or if it is hazardous waste, a specialized facility where it can be disposed of in a way that it prevents from becoming a danger to the community. Unfortunately, despite our best efforts, some of the waste ends up in our waterways, oceans, and landscapes. Litter cleanup is one of the major expense for most of the cities. It is one of the primary drivers for zero waste ordinances to eliminate items like plastic bags, styrofoam or polystyrene containers, and cigarette waste through smoking bans in public places or on beaches. In this webinar, we are going to focus on how SMEs can prevent landfill waste and hazardous waste. These have real bearings on businesses' revenues and liabilities, as well as on environment and human health. Let's begin by talking about waste disposal, how businesses get rid of waste. We've already mentioned 5 basic streams by which waste is disposed. It should come as no surprise by what homes and businesses get rid of ends up in a landfill, but by the type of things that ends up there might surprise you. Let's take food waste for example. Food waste not only includes parts of food that humans don't eat, such as peels, fat, or bones, but also include byproducts of food preparation as well as rejected items such as rotten, expired, or even just visually unappealing food. Would it surprise you to learn that UN estimates about 1.3 billion tons of food is wasted globally? This amounts to about $1 trillion worth of edible food. Furthermore, in the United States, 94% of food waste ends up either in a landfill or in a combustion facility. When organic matter, such as food waste, ends up in a landfill, it creates several problems. We know all waste takes time to decompose. In the meanwhile, waste continues to build up, forcing landfills to grow larger and larger. Not only are there environmental impacts or implications, but increased landfill needs can strain your local tax base, which in turn can impact your business's budget. As organic material decomposes, it releases large amounts of methane, a potent greenhouse gas 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Transporting waste to landfill also results in greenhouse gas emissions through vehicle use and the burning of fossil fuels. The World Resources Institute estimates that wasting 1.3 billion tons of food every year also results in 45 trillion gallons of water being wasted every year. This represents about 24% of all water being used in the agriculture sector, a sector that already uses 70% of the fresh water every year. Finally, if your business is involved in the purchase, preparation, or sale of food, this represents a significant financial problem since it represents lost revenue and no cost recovery. If this sounds like your business, what can you do about it? Well, oftentimes, adopting more sustainable practices requires an initial investment and higher ongoing costs. But this doesn't mean that businesses have to sacrifice profit. It only means that finding savings has to be a part of the solution, as these savings can be then used to fund other initiatives. Let's look at an example. Vallarta is a supermarket chain in California. They contracted Go to Zero, a consulting firm specializing in waste, to work with their 34 of their locations. This included implementing diversion programs such as for recycling, food donation, organic waste diversion, as well as any other opportunities to reduce waste, as identified by consulting firms' analysis. The consultant began by analyzing Vallarta's waste bills and quickly determined that they were overpaying for waste hauling. By reducing the size of the collection bins and the frequency of collection, they were able to reduce costs. By reducing the frequency of pickups, it is an important component of reducing the transportation footprint of waste disposal. By implementing recycling and diversion programs, the company was able to reduce organics sent to landfill by 415 tons per month and divert 115 tons of recyclable material each month, a total of 530 tons per month. What's more, the company was able to reduce its total hauling fees by about $18,000 per month. Now, if your business operates in fewer locations, or if your business operates in a location where waste collection and disposal is centralized, such as an office building or plaza, your options for directly influencing waste hauling schedule may be more limited. Your waste may be removed by the city or town in which your business operates. We'll talk about waste hauling options for smaller businesses later in the presentation. However, you may still have some options. For example, if waste removal is a cost included in your rent, could you negotiate a reduction? If your business can demonstrate lower waste output through smaller or fewer bins for waste collection, or through implementation of a diversion program over and above what the landlord requires, if you're able to implement a donation program for waste, so for some of your waste, for example, as the one which we went over in the case study, your business may be eligible for a tax credit. In any case, you should be prepared to perform a waste audit. We'll go more into detail into this later in the presentation, where we will provide you with the contact information so you can get help at the end of the webinar. We've already talked about some of the issues that are caused by landfilling of waste and why some of it requires special treatment beforehand. In addition to air pollutants, soil pollutants, and emissions into our groundwater, landfill waste also accounts for substantial greenhouse gas emissions. There are also transportation emissions associated with hauling waste to landfills. In addition, landfill emits hydrogen sulfide and ammonia. These gases can spread to nearby buildings where they can build up over time. Exposure to these gases can lead to adverse short-term health effects such as nausea, eye, lung, and throat irritation, headaches, difficulty sleeping, chest pain, and the aggravation of asthma. When the waste is incinerated, it can produce particulate matter and acid gases with similar health effects. So what can SMEs do about it? The reality is that most SMEs do not operate private landfills. They rely on municipal waste collection or they hire a private waste management company to remove their waste. Therefore, they actually don't have any control or even know about how their waste is removed and what happens to it once it leaves their business. However, there are some steps that SMEs can take to not only reduce their total waste footprint, but also to abate more harmful emissions. They can do this by first reducing the total amount of waste that gets sent to landfill, either through diversion, reuse, or repurposing. Second, switching the materials in products and services that can eliminate or reduce harmful emissions on disposal. Third, by monitoring the supply chain, both upstream and downstream, and ensuring that harmful waste emissions are being captured and not released into the air, water, and soil. These are some of the steps that SMEs can take to reduce the total waste, and we will discuss more later in the session. For now, we will focus on materials and supply chain. While some SMEs do specialize in acquiring raw materials and manufacturing products, most of them are service-oriented businesses, which means they deliver products and services derived from the supply chains. In Canada, service producing sector accounts to about 79% of SMEs. Very few of them process waste on site. This is because they purchase goods either for internal use or resale. This means that their largest contributions to emissions is from their upstream and downstream supply chains. While SMEs do not have direct control over their supply chains, they can do two things to influence their supply chains. First, make purchasing decisions that lead to abatement of emissions. And second, work with the vendors to ensure that abatement of emissions is considered while purchasing, distribution, and disposal. A good first step for small businesses is choosing products that contain little or no hazardous material. This can be accomplished by identifying products that are sold or used by businesses that contain potentially hazardous chemicals. Most of these products will contain a safety data sheet that provides this information or may also have a label on the product itself. Once a business has identified such products, it can examine options for non-hazardous replacements. Most products are proactive in demonstrating that they meet rigorous environmental standards, for example, Eco logo or Green Seal, and the exact requirements and standards may vary across different product types. However, not all materials that contribute to landfill emissions are clearly labeled as such. For example, polystyrene, a common material used in food containers and a package insulation, is often not explicitly labeled toxic or hazardous. However, polystyrene, which has a decomposition time of about 500 years, releases pollutants if incinerated, releases toxic chemicals when exposed to heat, releases air pollutants and ozone depleting substances when exposed to sunlight. In addition, as it breaks apart into smaller pieces, it poses a choking hazard to animals scavenging in landfills. Therefore, it is a good idea to get a list of most common materials that are sent to landfill that are hazardous and see if your business uses them. SMEs can also work directly with the vendors to select alternative products. For example, if your business uses a cleansing service, for example, you can check with them if they offer certified non-toxic cleansing products. If your business receives box shipments with internal bracing, you can check with them if they offer cardboard bracing as opposed to styrene. You can also consider a business's downstream. If you use a municipal waste hauler, you can check with them what materials are recyclable or compostable in your area, as this may differ in different jurisdictions. Try to get a potential list of materials as opposed to broad categories. If you use a private waste hauler, check with them what options there are for materials you don't currently recycle. Ask what policies are put in place for safe disposal of hazardous material. Sometimes SMEs are tenants in larger spaces and use private waste haulers selected by the landlord. However, this doesn't mean SMEs can't improve on existing waste disposal. Some businesses are starting to offer direct waste collection to tenants. For example, GoJava, a Toronto-based coffee supply and delivery service, now offers organic waste, foil packaging, coffee cup and lid, and coffee pot collection, even in buildings that don't provide it. Furthermore, efforts have been made by global legislative authorities in Europe, such as the EU End of Life Vehicles Directive, that requires car manufacturers to take back registered vehicles that require disposal. A survey was undertaken by automotive SMEs regarding the adoption of eco design strategies during the product life cycle. The designing strategies include designing for recyclability, material usage minimization, durability, remanufacturing, disassembly, energy efficiency, end of life, selection and application of eco materials, and designs inspired by nature. So, some industries are already moving in this direction. Lastly, SMEs can be proactive in encouraging consumers to dispose of their products they purchase responsibly. If the product contains materials that can be sent back to the supplier for credit, for example, e waste, glass bottles, or plastic containers, consider a take back program. This allows consumers to return harder to recycle materials and incentivizes them to make additional visits to your business. You can also educate your customers to dispose the products they purchase responsibly. For example, you can provide them information on how to sort different packaging materials so that they are recycled correctly. It could also consist of suggestions for secondary uses of your products. For example, reusing coffee grounds as a fertilizer or for odor control. This information could be presented on the company's website and with the right keywords can drive additional traffic. If your products are labeled, you can consider adding this information or using a QR code. While some of these proposals are centered around improved communication, others might appear more costly, such as switching to non toxic products or expanding your business's recycling. However, these changes can lead to additional tangible benefits. Some suppliers can provide you additional credit for returning the goods in good condition, for example, cardboard or glass. SMEs can also gain a valuable marketing strategy if they can demonstrate waste stewardship over and above the standard in the industry. Research has shown that many people are happy to pay more for products perceived as green. In fact, 70% of consumers surveyed in the buildings, electronics, automotive industry have suggested that they can pay an additional 5% for a green product if it meets the performance standard as a non-green alternative. If municipal waste disposal is used, establishing cost savings can be difficult. This is because disposal costs are enrolled into property taxes and not charged as user fees. This means that there is no direct cost savings for producing less waste unless the maximum allowance is exceeded. However, some regions do offer financial incentives or tax credits for adopting more sustainable, environmentally sustainable practices, such as waste minimization. SMEs can refer to federal, state, and municipal governments to see if their businesses can get some tax credits. For instance, Canada offers financial incentives for carbon reduction, such as rebates for energy efficiency in renovations of existing buildings, also known as retrofits. The UK's Department for Environmental and Food and Rural Affairs committed resources to anaerobic digestion to divert waste from landfill and enable generation of clean energy. In April 2009, £10 million was invested to support new composting and anaerobic digestion facilities including an additional support in the form of renewable obligation certificates, also known as ROCs. Also, policy tools such as regulatory targets to comply with the EU landfill directive and introduction of fiscal penalty of landfill tax charged on every ton of waste sent to landfill. When companies are considering how to best and most cost effectively reduce their landfill footprint, they should begin by taking an inventory of their most high impact products. Start with products that are large and smaller products sold in high quantities. Some products that are overtly hazardous will have a safety data sheet or a label associated with it. Some products can still contain hazardous material or hard to decompose components such as polystyrene or e-waste. For instance, some products that are not explicitly labeled as electronics, such as children's toys or electronic toiletries, can still contain potential e-waste, such as batteries. Therefore, be sure to check carefully. Once you've established which products make the highest contribution to landfill waste and which have the highest composition of hazardous materials, ask yourself, is there an alternative product of the same quality that can be easy to reuse, recycle, and contains fewer hazardous materials? How much will it cost to purchase or produce such a product? Will the consumer be willing to pay for it? Are there any products your company makes or sells that can be taken back? And some of the materials in the product or packaging that can be reclaimed or reused. What will be the take back cost? Can you afford to give the returning consumer a credit? Check with any services that your SME uses, such as food vendors, landlord, cleaning service, if they offer less hazardous and reduced waste options. What is the additional cost? And if it can be reclaimed elsewhere, such as in reduced waste hauling costs. Check with your suppliers if they are willing to take back some of your products or some of the part of the or components of the product, and if they're offering a purchasing credit. Check again with your state, local, and federal governments if they offer any incentives to your business. Stay tuned until the end of the presentation, where we will offer you some help to answer these questions. Now that we have discussed where waste goes and what happens to it, let's talk about what happens between the time a business generates waste and the time it leaves. Most businesses, large and small, have a designated storage area for waste. This can be one corner of a room, a separate room, or even an outbuilding. Where waste is kept and how much space is allocated for waste storage is actually an important question for SMEs. While some SMEs operate within a larger building where waste is centrally stored until it is collected, many must manage waste storage and disposal on their own. This means that any waste that is not immediately deposited outdoors must be stored in a dedicated area within their own space. Even in cases where waste is centrally stored, some SMEs may have to store specialized waste categories that the landlord will not accept on their own. Essentially, this space is operated at a loss since it only mitigates liability and does not generate revenue. Furthermore, waste storage of certain hazardous substances or even just waste in general must usually meet stricter requirements, as even relatively small amounts, when stored in a small space, create issues such as odor, health concerns, and potential effects on vulnerable persons, such as those with asthma. Each of these can, in turn, represent an added legal liabilities for a business. In short, the storage of waste represents an added cost and liability in and of itself. So it's worthwhile thinking about how SMEs can limit both the time and the quantity that needs to be stored, that space required for waste storage, as well as the liabilities associated with it. First, SMEs can reduce the amount of waste they produce. This is different from diversion, since diverted waste must be temporarily stored before it is removed. Secondly, Look for large volume categories that can be collapsed or compacted. Collapsing cardboard boxes is fairly common, but depending on the amounts regularly used by the business, it may be worth looking at other categories that could potentially be collapsed or compacted. Also, check if any waste haulers or buyers will give you credit for compacted waste or specific types. Are there drop off points along the SME supply routes where some types for waste could be safely transported and dropped off? And would the SME receive a credit for that? Are expiry dates for products used in your business creating more waste than necessary? Certain products, such as food and medication, have expiry dates, and any unsold product must be stored as waste until disposal. Products that cannot be removed with regular garbage, such as medication and cleaning products, will occupy space even longer. Check if certain products the SME buys can chronically expiring in high numbers and see if regular ordering can be reduced. Finally, are the internal processes efficient? A common trend among businesses, large and small, is transitioning from hard copy to e-copy, thus reducing substantial paper waste entirely and reducing preprint paper storage requirements. Obviously, reducing waste storage needs can offer both immediate and long-term financial benefits to your business. Space that no longer needs to be allocated for waste storage can potentially be reclaimed for other purposes, such as storage of conventional waste, sellable product, or materials required for your business. Of course, any hazardous material should continue to be stored separately according to whatever safety requirements and local legislation is in place. The conversion of traditional waste or recycling streams to revenue generating streams is an obvious financial benefit. Many businesses will accept waste cardboard, wood, scrap material, or even beverage containers and will provide payment or a credit. If you run a business that receives large amounts of shipments, such as retail store, or goes through a lot of glass bottles, such as restaurant, there's a recognizable incentive to generate revenue. However, other types of business should assess their waste streams to see if they produce sizable quantities of recoverable waste. For example, if a hotel or dining hall has vending machines that dispense soda, most likely it is being consumed on site and the cans discarded. Could recovering the cans with a separate bin and delivering them for credit generate enough revenue and save enough money in disposal costs to justify the change? While more geared toward restaurants and grocery stores, expiry audits can be helpful to other types of SMEs, such as pharmacies, convenience stores, or gyms, where health food products are sold, could also potentially benefit. Some benefits of these reductions may be more diluted and long term, but still significant. In Canada, local governments reported revenues from waste management of $2.8 billion, but reported expenditures of $3.3 billion. If, within an individual jurisdiction, there is a collective effort to reduce the amount of waste entering the disposal stream, it has the potential to reduce local government expenditures, which may be reflected in lower property and business taxes. These solutions are relatively easy to scale for small and medium sized businesses, but they do require an audit of waste types, components, storage practices, and associated costs. If someone working for you is already assigned to manage internally generated waste, ask that person if they can provide the following information: a list of any products that must be stored separately due to safety concerns, and the volume, the floor area allocated to waste storage, and an estimate of how full it usually is, and an expiry log if your business keeps one. Using this information, determine if storage of any of these materials prior to disposal can be reduced through either return to the supplier or to a buyer for credit, or through reduced purchasing of items with high expiry rates. Start with the highest volume items and work your way down. In each case, the challenge is determining whether or not your business generates enough volume to make the change financially viable. For example, If a cardboard buyer requires you to save as much compacted cardboard that it requires additional storage, then the initiative becomes self defeating. This is also true with respect to purchasing. If lowering purchasing rates of often expiring products lowers them to the point where any bulk discounts is lost, it serves no financial purpose. In either case, it is important to calculate the net change, taking into account storage cost reductions, disposable cost reductions, credits, potential purchasing increases, and any additional equipment required to make the business case. It may be beneficial to see if initiatives such as return for credit can be grouped with other local businesses to make them viable. To recap, first, conduct an audit of the type and volume of products that contain potentially hazardous materials. Calculate the area allocated for waste storage and estimate how full it is. If you carry products or support stock that expires, audit the expiry log if you keep one. Otherwise, estimate the amount of each product that is thrown out due to expiry. Include cost and lost revenue in your analysis. Next, check if any materials being thrown out in larger quantities can be returned for credit, either to your supplier or a third party buyer. If this isn't an option and you have substantial amounts of waste taking up significant space, such as e waste, chemicals, furniture, or large items, are there drop off points along your downstream supply route? Could these drop offs be incorporated and is the cost justified? Are you throwing out too much expired product? Could you reduce order size or frequency without increasing per unit costs too much? Finally, in your internal processes, creating excess waste. At the end of this presentation, I provide some information on where you can get help answering these questions. We've talked about different solutions that businesses can implement relating to minimizing waste and the way SMEs can reduce the environmental, societal, and financial impacts associated with it. But what if there was a way you could actually turn your waste into an additional revenue stream and use it to grow your business? What if your business could eliminate the costs associated with waste storage, treatment, and disposal and increase revenue at the same time? Let's look at some examples of businesses that took some of their waste and dumped it right back into their business. In the fashion world, the average apparel factory discards about 60,000 pounds of perfectly usable pre-consumer textile every week. The Council for Textile Recycling reports that more than 70 pounds of textiles per US citizens are going to landfills annually. That's more than 21 billion pounds this year alone. When textile is produced, it requires energy, raw materials, and water. If textile is wasted, it also represents waste of these vital resources. It also contributes to landfilling. Moreover, it represents diminished profits, since apparel factories must budget for a certain percentage of the fabric they purchase to be a non-recoverable cost. Some of this waste has been traced to inefficient cutting patterns, which results in between 11 to 30% of the fabric used in clothing ending up as waste. The good news is that the industry is beginning to address this problem. FabScrap is a service in New York City that collects waste fabric. Some of this is collected fabric is shredded and used to create products like insulation, carpet padding, or furniture lining. However, fabric that can be salvaged and sold to students, artists, crafters, quilters, sewers, and even other fashion designers. Some designers even seek out this material. One New York designer, known as Zero Waste Daniel, not only uses scrap fabric in his designs, but creates designs that produce no scrap material. The result is high-end fashion, no waste cost or waste footprint associated with it. We have already discussed the importance of taking an inventory of products your company sells or discards that have a high waste footprint associated with them. If your company is involved in manufacturing or preparation, You can do the same with your processes. If your company produces paper products, such as stationery or greeting cards, is a lot of paper trim being discarded? If you run a restaurant, are you producing large amounts of cooking grease or fats that could be recovered? The key to scaling the solution for SMEs is uncovering which waste materials are both valuable as a commodity and are produced by your business in sufficient quantities. But especially, look for opportunities to reuse materials within your own business. For example, if you have a farm, nursery, or other agriculture or horticulture businesses, what happens to your vegetable waste? If it is composted on site? If not, could it be? Composting produces high quality soil which can then be reused within the business, decreasing the costs of purchasing soil or fertilizer. Soil produced from compost could also be sold, creating an added revenue stream. If you are unsure of where most of your waste is coming from or what waste is valuable, there are a few steps you can take. First, conduct a waste audit, as we've already discussed. Before sure to account for associated costs, see what other businesses in a similar industry may be doing with the types of waste you identify in your audit. It also never hurts to get a second set of eyes. Get a consultant to evaluate your processes. Often, they can find missed opportunities as well as put you in touch with other organizations that can provide the services you need to effectively reuse your waste. Keep watching until the end of this webinar, where we will provide some contact information where you can get help with this. This brings us to the end of today's presentation. I hope it was engaging and that you learned something that you can apply in your business. This is a B for Purpose presentation. If you would like to know more about any of the information provided in this presentation, use the contact information on your screen or click the link below. I'd also like to encourage you to ask questions in the comment section below, where we'll be happy to respond and keep the discussion going. Also, please come back to this channel next week on November 24th. We'll be presenting the next webinar in our series on material and water reductions.